Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, February 7th, 2023. Time for another show, whether we feel like it or not. That's the awful truth of it. So, as you can hear, probably, still recovering from my bout with COVID, although the COVID itself is gone, and instead just cold symptoms left behind, which may just be, a cold that followed the COVID. Who knows? But I think we can kind of power through this. And anyway, it's kind of an important day. It is, well, for one thing, it's Joan McCarter Day. Tuesday is an awfully important day, and you hate to miss a Tuesday. And it is also State of the Union Day, which, outside of the program, we know to be an important sort of historical type happening, or at least that's the way the speech is classified. I've never really believed that was the case, but it is the sort of thing that if you are taking a history class and you refer to the text of a State of the Union speech, that will be considered a really hardcore, direct piece of evidence, first-person account of things, and yada yada. So I don't know. So for students, I guess, of political science, and we're supposed to be that, but we are practicalist students, real politique students of political science, and I don't know. So the speech usually, pretty predictable. And of course, in case you have any difficulty predicting it, they will give you the text of the speech beforehand, and people will even give you the texts of their responses to the speech beforehand, because the responses to the speech don't really matter with respect to what the speech actually says. They're not actually responses. They're just volleys returned. That's basically about it. And now I don't know whether they're still doing it this way, but once it became clear that you could get the newspapers to claim that you gave a response to the State of the Union address by filming yourself in your bathroom mirror saying nasty things about the president, or for that matter, rumors that you made up about vampire pedophiles in the basement of various places running the world secretly, and that you could publish that on YouTube, and the newspaper would say you gave a response to the State of the Union address. Well, now it's become a cottage industry. So, all right, well, that's good. I guess that means a growth industry, jobs are being created, the jobs numbers are up again. Congratulations to Joe Biden. This was a phenomenon that started in the Obama administration, of course, when it was not enough for Republicans to give a Republican response to an Obama State of the Union address. The Tea Party wanted their own response and found that if they videotaped it and streamed it online somewhere, that the newspapers would treat that as an official response of some sort. And then, of course, the floodgates open. So now I expect, I don't know whether it's really happening. Maybe it's even happened in years past. But this year, now that she's sort of joined officialdom, I'm wondering whether Murdery Trader Green, at this point in her career, films herself giving responses to State of the Union address and puts it out there and tries to pretend that it's official. And by the way, the phenomenon spread. And it wasn't limited to crazy Republicans giving speeches in their basements. Lots of Democrats joined in as well. And Progressive Caucus said, we'll give a response. And although that was probably a little bit more measured response and had more, likely had more policy substance to it, I couldn't tell you for sure because I didn't watch them. But I have a feeling that might be the case. Anyway, when Joan gets here later on today, and I'm assuming everything is still okay, because the State of the Union, while it takes a lot of time, and they put an awful lot of work at Daily Kos into covering it live and in real time and facilitating the discussion that ensues, and that's the real value of the State of the Union, is the discussion that ensues. I mean, the real value, of course, is probably among real people like you guys who watch the State of the Union and discuss it with one another, as opposed to the punditry and their discussion of it. But at any rate, that's where I think the chief value of the address lies, in the in the discussion that ensues. But they put a lot of work into facilitating that, and that's extra hours for everybody. And I was kind of wondering I've wondered for years now whether that would affect how things would go in the morning. And it hasn't historically, but I always feel like it should. You should say, well, if I'm going to be on duty tonight, facilitating discussion into the late hours, at least on the East Coast. Luckily, it's being done coordinated largely from the West Coast. Then you shouldn't have to do stuff early in the morning either. But I don't know. Maybe this is considered separate. We're not a Daily Coast production. This is just sort of an outside favor that Joan does because we've known each other for a long time. Anyway, things we have to catch up on that I don't know whether Joan is interested in discussing them, but there are happenings on Capitol Hill, and we tend to focus on Capitol Hill on Tuesdays as a result of her visit, that we haven't caught up with. Just so we all know the state of play, I'm sure you've seen reports, but we'll make sure that you've heard it from us. You heard it here last. Ilhan Omar, Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, has in fact been removed from the Foreign Affairs panel in an act of tit for tat and revenge, except the tit and the tat don't fit together particularly well in these cases. But yeah, they went ahead and booted her off the committee, despite the fact that there were briefly noises being made by the sorts of Republicans who like to identify as moderates that they didn't think it was a particularly good idea. But then they were reassured that everything was okay because I guess, like we were discussing last week, the sop to them was, well, we'll also announce the news that George Santos is stepping down from his committee assignments. Well, okay, that's as it should be. He lied about everything in his background and his entire resume. And by the way, the lies keep pouring out, and I guess perhaps today might be a good day to spend a little bit of time catching up on what some of those new lies are. But, I mean, to say, well, it's okay to vote to throw Ilhan Omar off a committee because, after all, George Santos made up everything about his background. She didn't, but we disagree with the things that she said. Okay. And that's the basic issue there, is that's how Republicans would describe throwing Paul Gosar and Murdery Trader Green off of their committees. Well, Democrats disagreed with the things that they said. And I suppose at the simplest level, you couldn't be called a liar exactly for saying that. Anyway, here's the New York Times report of it, just to kind of give you a comprehensive overview of the facts as they happened, with the New York Times twist on it, I guess. But just to say that we've covered all bases here. House ousts Ilhan Omar from Foreign Affairs panel as GOP, although they did use the periods and said GOP, as GOP exacts revenge. In a highly politicized vote, the Republican-led chamber criticized Ms. Omar's statements about Israel, which, of course, she did make, although she made them some time ago. There is that. I mean, it's not it's not that she doesn't continue to believe the thing that she believed, but I don't think she has continued to make the statement. So we'll see whether there's any discussion of that in this article. But I mean, essentially, they were angry that she wasn't thrown off when she made the statements, so they're going to throw her off now. All right, so in a highly politicized vote, the Republican-led chamber criticized Ms. Omar's statements about Israel, delivering retribution for the removal of GOP members when Democrats held the majority. Of course, and somewhere in pocket, there's another article that tries to lay out the differences between the two. But I think we also kind of inherently know the differences, which was that she made statements that made people who are strong Israel supporters, whether for good reason or otherwise, angry, yes, but no members of the committees, as I understood it, feared for their safety because Ilhan Omar was around, whereas that was not the case with Paul Gosar and Murdery Trader Green. People were worried about their violent tendencies. Well, anyway, Karen Demirjian is the author of the piece at the New York Times. A bitterly divided House on Thursday ousted Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota from the Foreign Affairs Committee over past comments about Israel that were widely condemned as anti-Semitic, as Republicans moved to cater to the demands of right-wing members and mete out punishment to a Democrat their party has demonized for years. The 218 to 211 party line vote, with one member voting present, settled a partisan score, which, actually should be, I think, probably described differently, but that's about the most milquetoast way you could possibly have described it. Settled a partisan score. Well, reminder to the readership that the New York Times generally frowns on partisan scoring, or is supposed to, or does when Democrats do it. But it's just a matter of course when Republicans do, for some reason. Settled a partisan score, and not all that well either, that has been festering since 2021, when the House, then controlled by Democrats, stripped Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia and Paul Gosar of Arizona of their committee assignments for social media posts in which they endorsed violence against Democrats. See, that's the difference. The removal of Ms. Omar, delivered on a threat that Speaker Kevin McCarthy of California made at the time to retaliate if his party took House majority by removing Democrats whom Republicans regarded as unfit to serve on committees. Last week, he unilaterally removed Representatives Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell, both of California, his California delegation colleagues, by the way, from Permanent Select Committee on the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, where membership is appointed and thus not subject to a vote. Mr. McCarthy's decision to force the removal of Ms. Omar, a step that some of his rank-and-file members resisted for a moment, in the earliest days of his new majority, demonstrated his determination to ingratiate himself with the hard-right Republican base, which has made the Somali-born Ms. Omar a target for some of its most vicious attacks. Former President Donald Trump famously said in 2019 that Ms. Omar and 3 other progressive women of color should, quote, go back to their countries, though she was the only one not born in the United States. The vote on Thursday was also a bid by Mr. McCarthy to curry favor with pro-Israel groups and evangelical voters. That's the pro-Israel group he's most worried about, of course. Evangelical voters who are pro-Israel because they need Israel around to be destroyed in the apocalypse. Anyway, and to drive a wedge among Democrats, many of whom had condemned Ms. Omar's statements about Israel. In 2019, Ms. Omar drew criticism from Democrats and Republicans alike for tweeting that certain pro-Israel groups were, quote, all about the Benjamins, baby, appearing to refer to $100 bills in what was seen as invoking an anti-Semitic trope about Jews and money. She later apologized for the comment. 2 years later, Ms. Omar seemingly equated atrocities carried out by the U.S. military to those committed by terrorist groups like the Taliban and Hamas. She later said that she had not meant to compare them. Yet, during an unusually raw debate on the House floor on Thursday, prominent Democrats, including many Jewish members, stood alongside Ms. Omar's closest friends in Congress to defend her in passionate and at times emotional speeches. They accused Republicans of hypocrisy, true, xenophobia, also true, and racism, that as well, for targeting her while saying nothing about anti-Semitic remarks by members of their own party, some of whom have associated with Holocaust deniers, and some of whom have been stripped of their committee assignments in the past as well. Remember that Marjorie Taylor Greene, thrown off her committees for making comments that endorsed violence against Democrats, also spent her time making comments that were anti-Semitic, like that certain wildfires had been started by Jewish-controlled space lasers. Okay. And remember, she said, well, I didn't know. I didn't know that they were Jewish, which is pretty interesting. That space lasers controlled by the Rothschild family, which honestly, at this point, you're just a bad anti-Semite. You're just rotten at your job as being anti-Semitic if you actually don't understand that the Rothschild family is meant to be an avatar for Jews everywhere. But, I don't doubt that she could be horrible at that job, too. I mean, that's a real possibility. Anyway, so the article continues, a blatant double standard is being applied here, said Representative Gregory Meeks of New York, the top Democrat on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Something just doesn't add up. And what is the difference between Representative Omar and these members? Could it be the way she looks? Could it be her religious practices? Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, another Democrat of New York, was more direct about the exiling of Ms. Omar, who is black and one of the first Muslim women elected to Congress. This is about targeting women of color in the United States of America, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez said. Republicans were comparatively sober as they made their case for removing Ms. Omar. Individuals who hold such hateful views should rightly be barred from that type of committee, said Representative Mike Lawler of New York. But they could be on the tax-cutting committees. I guess that's okay. Words matter. Rhetoric matters. It leads to harm. And so the Congresswoman is being held accountable for her words and her actions. Mr. McCarthy and the members of his leadership team were nowhere to be seen during the floor debate, during which the number of Democrats speaking on behalf of Ms. Omar outnumbered Republicans 2-1. After the vote, Mr. McCarthy defended the decision to remove Ms. Omar, telling reporters that this was not tit for tat. Aha! But based on her statements. I see. I'm not removing people from all committees, Mr. McCarthy said, pointing out that Ms. Omar had been excised from just one panel. Okay, that's interesting. Unlike Ms. Green and Mr. Gosar, who were generalized threats to the entire body, and so were no safer on one committee than another. But I get your drift. But his effort to oust Ms. Omar stalled and nearly faltered in recent weeks, highlighting the challenges Mr. McCarthy faces as he tries to make good on his promised agenda with a razor-thin majority that has already proved to be unruly. Some Republicans were concerned about being seen as hypocritical after they had railed against the removals of Ms. Green and Mr. Gosar, and about the precedent set by expelling a lawmaker for her views and statements, particularly by a party that routinely condemns cancel culture. Yes. In the end, after days of haggling by Mr. McCarthy, all but one Republican fell in line, with Representative David Joyce of Ohio voting present, because of how brave he is, as he did on the Democrats' resolution to expel Mr. Gosar. All right, well, at least it's consistent, if not necessarily brave. Debate over the move turned raucous, particularly after Ms. Omar made a defiant speech defending herself. She drew cheers and applause from her colleagues as she declared, "Take your vote or not, I am here to stay." Shortly before members cast their ballots, Ms. Omar charged that the move to expel her was an inevitable extension of the false birther conspiracy theory promoted by Mr. Trump, that former President Barack Obama, the first black occupant of the Oval Office, was secretly an African-born Muslim. I am Muslim. I am an immigrant, and interestingly from Africa, Ms. Omar said on the House floor. Is anyone surprised that I am being targeted? Is anyone surprised that I am somehow deemed unworthy to speak about American foreign policy? Ms. Omar's ouster capped off an opening month in the House that has been defined by political jockeying and messaging far more than serious policy ventures. During a history-making struggle to claim the Speaker's gavel, of course, it took him 100 years to get a hold of the gavel. And one of the things that he had to do in order to get those votes lined up was establish the new panel investigating the, quote, weaponization of government. The House has also passed an array of legislation, all doomed in the Senate, that would defund IRS enforcement against tax cheats, prosecute some abortion providers, and end federal coronavirus vaccine mandates and precautions. The stage was set this week for Ms. Omar's expulsion when Representative George Santos of New York, the embattled Republican freshman who has admitted to having misrepresented his background and is facing multiple fraud investigations, announced that he would temporarily remove himself from his House committees until his name was cleared. Mr. Santos has become a lightning rod for accusations of a double standard, as Democrats scorned McCarthy for protecting him while targeting Ms. Omar, Mr. Schiff, and Mr. Swalwell. But Some Republicans were still uncomfortable with the move, holding out until Mr. McCarthy agreed to add language to the measure, citing lawmakers' right to appeal such decisions to the Ethics Committee, a mechanism that was already available to them. He added explicitly to this resolution to make sure that we apply the same standards not just to Democrats but to Republicans. Representative Victoria Spartz of Indiana said, and Mr. McCarthy said of Mr. McCarthy during the floor vote, examining her decision to back the measure. That gesture was not enough for some other Republicans. Representative Ken Buck of Colorado, one of the more conservative naysayers, exacted a pledge from Mr. McCarthy to strengthen the appeals process for members facing punitive actions in the future, a commitment that won over most of the remaining holdouts. So they built, that sounds like protection for themselves. Should the House, control of the House turn over again later, what if more revenge is exacted? I don't want to be the target of that revenge, but of course, the rules that they pass to protect themselves now are subject to repeal by a new Democratic majority later on if they think it's a bad idea. But who knows what they're going to make of things. That reminds me, another looming congressional issue that we ought to speak about, and something that I know Joan is particularly interested in. But let me, I'll scroll around and see if I can find the latest of the George Santos lies. I mean, perhaps one of the most ridiculous so far. And I don't know. I'll see if I can find whether I, in fact, parked an article about it or not. I mean, it was so ridiculous. I didn't mean to spend a great deal of time on it, but apparently, yeah, here it is. All right. Bloomberg. They usually make quick work of things like this. And I don't even know if I'll even be able to see the actual article, or whether it's behind a paywall, but you're ready for this one. George Santos, it says, George Santos produced ill-fated Spider-Man musical. At least he claims he did. And I don't know why you would claim such a thing, because apparently it was a flop, but that's pretty amazing. Laura Davison writes this again for Bloomberg, and let's see what they got here. Add Broadway producer to the long list of George Santos's fabrications while running for Congress in 2021. So would this be the first time around? Okay. I'm not, well, no, in 2021. All right. Santos told some potential donors he was a producer on the musical Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. I had no idea there was such a musical, but, you know, you have a better sense of these things when you live in the New York area and see them advertised. This, according to people familiar with the discussions, that show, which actually ran from 2011 to 2014, when he was like 11 years old or something. I mean, he's a young guy. Anyway, was an ill-fated production that lost tens of millions of dollars and suffered from technical mishaps and actor injuries. Maybe he figured no one who actually worked on it will lay claim to it, so they also won't bother coming out to disprove some other idiots. If you want to claim responsibility for that horrific mess, go ahead. I don't know. Anyway, the lead producer, Michael Cole, that's C-O-H-L, denied Santos's involvement, saying through an assistant that he wasn't a producer on the musical. Santos's name also never appeared in the playbills for the show, but who knows what name he might have been using for that matter, by the way. A spokeswoman for Santos referred questions to his lawyer, Joseph W. Murray, who didn't immediately respond to a voicemail seeking comment. That fake claim adds to the falsehoods that Santos, 34, told supporters while running for Congress. He's 34 now. So this is 2011, when they first opened, would be 10 years before he said it. He's 34 now. In 2021, he would have been, I guess, about 32, depending on when his birthday is. So at 22, which, by the way, was like what? 3 years removed from his arrest in Brazil for stealing checks. Okay. Well, maybe he stole the checks, ran to New York, and decided he was going to use this Brazilian person's checking account to produce a musical. I don't know. Anyway, well, it was a lie, probably. So, I guess anything goes at that point. So let's see. It adds to the lies told to supporters while running for Congress. The New York Republican said all these lies, though. He graduated from Baruch College, that he was a volleyball player and an outstanding star in that respect, that he worked at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, that his grandparents had survived the Holocaust, mother died in 9/11, all of those claims being untrue. Very interesting. Let's see. What is this? Is this another story? Are they just pitching another story? Hampton's donor funded Santos with crypto cash before crash? I guess so. That's another thing. But anyway, back to this story. Santos, who was sworn in last month, is one of the most embattled members of the House of Representatives. You know all about that. Nearly 4 out of 5 voters in his district, covering parts of Long Island and Queens, think he should resign. Not that that has any bearing. This week, Santos said he would step down from serving on committees while he's under investigation. He's being probed by U.S. and Brazilian authorities, and complaints have been filed to the Federal Election Commission and House Ethics Committee. When Spider-Man was playing on Broadway, I might as well tell you this before the break, Santos was in his early to mid-20s and was still living in Brazil for some of 2011, so it sounds kind of unlikely. That's the year it opened. He worked as a customer service representative at a call center for Dish Network in Queens at this time, according to the New York Times. And in 2013, he founded this Friends of Pets United, which may or may not have been a real charity, but in any case is also accused of some fraud as well. That one particular case that we heard about a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, that seems to have been a fraud. Santos, it says, and Spider-Man do have something in common. They're both well known for things not going as planned. Is that really a similarity? I guess that'll work. All right. Well, we'll probably just jump right back out of this. There's probably a little more detail to the story, but you know what? At this point, who cares? It's just another ridiculous item for the pile. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Almost lost control of things. What's the name of my show again? All right, well, let's see. That's pretty much the end of the George Santos story, although I will give you the flourish with which the writer wound up the story. I mentioned to you at the beginning of this last wind-up paragraph here that Santos and Spider-Man have something in common. This is a real stretch. They both are well known for things not going as planned. I don't know how, I mean, that's not how I really think of Spider-Man or George Santos, really, but okay. Spider-Man, the musical, that is, at a cost of $75 million, is the most expensive musical ever made. The show featured music by rock stars Bono and The Edge, of U2, of course, as well as aerial combat scenes and complex scenery Plagued by high costs and technical problems, the production closed at a financial loss. But I guess if you were looking for a possible reason why George Santos would claim such a thing, perhaps it's the fact that it was the most expensive musical ever made, and so therefore kind of ostentatious maybe, and involved famous people in the writing of the music, which, whatever. I imagine that was fairly expensive too, so maybe that was a prestige thing for him. I don't know. Who can guess what his motivations for lying like that might really be? All right, let's see. I'll make a quick scroll through looking around for, I'm pretty sure I had put something aside with somebody explaining various differences between the committee stripping for Ilhan Omar and Gosar and Murdery Trader Green. Although I think we've covered the basics of it, but I thought it might be of some interest to see what someone else's take on this was. There we are. There was a piece from Aaron Blake about this back on January 27th. How the Ilhan Omar committee vote compares to Marjorie Taylor Greene's. Just thought that might be of some interest to some of you. From the moment the House voted to remove Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene from her committee 2 years ago, now House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has pledged retribution. If that's the new standard, McCarthy said, we have a long list. And I guess the list turned out to be 3 people. Extremely long. McCarthy has already ticked 2 names off of it. Adam Schiff, of course, and Swalwell, kicked off of the Intelligence Committee. But perhaps the most direct comparison to the Green situation is McCarthy's quest to remove Ilhan Omar. That isn't proving quite as simple. You know why, and you know that they eventually did succeed in it. But given the uncertainty in McCarthy's claim that he's simply applying a new set of standards, a new standard set by the Democrats, it's worth running through a comparison of the 2 situations. One significant difference could be bipartisanship. While McCarthy attacked Democrats for taking the unprecedented step of removing Green, such actions are, of course, usually taken by the member's own party, the effort wound up winning the support of 11 House Republicans. The later removal of Paul Gosar also earned the votes of 2 Republicans, so it wasn't strictly Democrats setting the precedent and deciding that these members' conduct merited such a response. In Omar's case, we don't know how the vote will shake out. Now we do. It was party line. Some Democrats, especially Jewish ones, may have or have in the past been highly critical of her anti-Semitic tropes, which we'll get to, but we don't need to get to. What seems clear is this won't garner a unanimous vote of the Republican conference, but it actually did, minus 1 present vote, right? We found out about that. But at the time, Nancy Mace and Victoria Spartz were holdouts, but they came around and provided their votes. It would surely be embarrassing for McCarthy to lose such an early vote in his tenure as Speaker, early in his tenure. But beyond that personal political calculus, it seems possible that the attempted removal of Omar could be completely partisan in a way that Green's and Gosar's weren't. And it apparently won't even be unanimously supported by that party. But, I'd say they got pretty damn close on unanimity from their party, but there was definitely no bipartisanship. So there's also this in Green's case that involved a number of things, including her past promotion of bogus conspiracy theories about 9/11 and mass shootings, but the effort was really touched off by the revelation that her social media accounts had promoted violence against Democrats and federal government officials. This wound up being the impetus for removing Gosar as well, and that removal came shortly after the January 6th insurrection. The conduct mostly occurred before she was elected to the House in 2020, in Green's case. So that's interesting, too. I had said that Omar's statements are not long past, but they are in the past. But then so clearly were most of Green's statements that were highlighted during the removal. Not that she stopped making such comments, and then, of course, went on to toy with Holocaust denialism and the Jewish space laser thing while she was in Congress. Anyway, while facing down her removal, or it says in Omar's case, the effort is focused on her past use of anti-Semitic tropes, most of them while serving in Congress. So there is that. Let's see. Omar has sought to highlight a difference. Also, she said she apologized. Aaron Blake gives that sort of a partial thumbs up. That's true, but only in part. Twice in her first weeks in office in 2019, Omar issued firm apologies for her use of anti-Semitic tropes, one for saying it's all about the Benjamins while discussing the pro-Israel lobby, and one for a 2012 tweet in which she said, Israel has hypnotized the world. Omar added that she didn't fully understand the history of the tropes. I don't know about the hypnotism. Is that a trope? I don't know. But a month later, she referenced what even some Democrats criticized as another anti-Semitic trope, and this is not a good one, that of dual loyalty, which Donald Trump has also trafficked in when she decried powerful forces who push for allegiance to a foreign country. This time, Omar declined to apologize and also got some backup from some in her party. The House wound up overwhelmingly passing a symbolic resolution rebuking anti-Semitism, but without singling out Omar, and only after adding rebukes to other forms of bigotry as well. So, all right, some comparisons there. Not much more worth mining from the article, but just wanted to mention or read a little bit of it since I had mentioned that it existed out there. But now to scroll back up to try and remind myself of the other things I wanted to share with you, which don't jump immediately to mind any longer. Okay, but I think they actually, was there something else? I'm scrolling because there was a jump away from the topic. Yes, so there was one more thing I wanted to squeeze in before I jumped to a different topic, but also might be a good time to use some other material for a transition. But because we had mentioned George Santos, I wanted to make mention of this that I had seen in the Daily Kos Elections Morning Digest one day last week. In fact, it was Wednesday, February 1st, that I had seen it. They just happened to make a great point right up top in the headline and in the first entry that day, because George Santos is on my mind here. The Morning Digest headline that day, last Wednesday, was the George Santos of Ohio, who cost the GOP a key House seat in 2022, weighs another bid. And I said, wait a second, what are we talking about here? And then I saw the picture and I said, oh yeah, that guy. What was that guy's name again? And we talked about him on the show. We read the ridiculous articles about how, weird and crazy he was. But this was before we knew about George Santos. And now looking back, we say, wait a second. It doesn't rise quite, nothing ever that I know of has ever risen to the George Santos level. But who are we talking about? It was Ohio Republican J.R. Majewski. Do you remember this guy? He was a QAnon ally who proved to be one of his party's very worst nominees for any office in 2022, according to the folks at the Digest, and they really know. Well, he said Monday that he was thinking about another rematch against longtime Democratic Representative Marcy Kaptur. That's who he was running against. Majewski, whom the NRCC abandoned after the Associated Press reported that he'd lied about serving in Afghanistan, wrote, "As I consider, I want to make it clear my decision will not be made by the D.C. swamp or the political establishment. I'm looking forward to making a decision very soon." Okay. From a political standpoint, they look at that and say, well, that would be fine. A Majewski reprise would not be welcome news for national Republicans who will want to target Kaptur once more after their counterparts in the Buckeye State get the chance to gerrymander the state's congressional map all over again. See another story entirely for that. Kaptur, who was first elected to represent the Toledo area in 1982, was a top redistricting target list last cycle, and Republicans thought they had her on the ropes after they radically transformed her 9th district from a 59-40 Biden constituency to one that Trump would have taken 51-48. However, everything changed when Majewski, a conservative activist who attended the January 6th Trump rally that preceded the attack on the Capitol, shocked everyone by defeating 2 state legislators in the May 2022 primary to face the longest-serving congresswoman in American history. Wow. Captor and her allies recognized the opportunity the Republican voters had handed them and went on to air a litany of ads arguing that Majewski's presence at the riot that made him a danger to law enforcement. Majewski claims he never actually entered the Capitol building. And then, of course, there was the fake claims about service in Afghanistan, and that can't help very much. But just goes to show what happens if you actually discover this prior to the election. The NRCC abandons you. But somehow that wasn't discovered in time for George Santos. Anyway, there you go. Captor ended up defeating Majewski in a 57-43 landslide, a result that somehow hasn't deterred him from mulling a rematch. I just thought that was kind of interesting. All right. Today would be an excellent day. Speaking of reports from the states, this one, of course, being Ohio, for us to catch up on a couple of new submissions. I don't know if I can get them both in, although it will require a little bit of engineering. But Rosalind McGregor, longtime listener to the show and sometime contributor. It's been a while since she has offered us something up and now is on something of a tear. And I was reminded of it yesterday afternoon, although I actually was flipping through my email yesterday after the show and remembered, oh gosh, didn't I get a submission that I was supposed to, share on the air at some point? And I kind of lost track of everything. The week away from COVID and not really having, recovered my wits and all that time. I just really haven't been on top of it. But I think back on January 24th, I think she actually emailed me this selection, and now she's got a follow-up piece, so I really want to catch up. And this one takes us over to Michigan, but another one of these. This is the beauty of these kinds of submissions from folks who have an eye on local situations. The way I bore you to death with Loudoun County stuff, except this time she's got something that's really important and exciting that we really ought to be aware of because it's indicative of a larger trend. That's the excuse I use for boring you with Loudoun County stuff. But when I do it, it's boring. When she does it, it's exciting. You get the idea. This from Ottawa, and this fooled me too. Ottawa. Are we talking about? No, we're talking about Ottawa County in Michigan and the surrounding municipalities or the included municipalities in her follow-up story. But apparently there's a whole movement on there fueled by, a lot of the things that fueled the stupid stories that we had here in Loudoun County, resistance to mask mandates, resistance to vaccine mandates, resistance to science in general with respect to COVID, but that was used as a launching pad for all sorts of political organizing and activity. And I guess in the Ottawa County area, they've been electing these kooks who have organized themselves. It's a very Republican area. And so if you can convince the Republicans that your group of kooks is the new hotness, you'll find yourself elected to office. And of course, because you're anti-establishment, rules and laws and stuff like that don't apply to you because that stuff's not cool. And why don't you just govern this way? Well, let me roll Rosalind McGregor's take on what's happening in Ottawa, and it sets up her follow-up piece, which perhaps, I don't know, we'll see whether we share that in the later today or in the coming days, getting more specific about what's going on. Let me give you the setup here. Hang on. Rosalind, take it away, would you?
Good morning, David. This is Rosalind McGregor. I'm happy to be able to return as your correspondent from Michigan. It's been a while since I've shared items of interest, as we've all been occupied, suffering through a pandemic and the Trump administration. I thought you'd be interested in knowing what's going on in Ottawa County, as it's the fastest growing county in Michigan, according to the 2020 census. The county is situated along the Lake Michigan shoreline, with Holland and Grand Haven being well-known vacation towns. It's also very Republican and part of West Michigan's large community of Dutch Calvinist Christian faithful. Apparently, the last Democratic president candidate to win the county was George McClellan against Abraham Lincoln. During the run-up to the 2022 election, a far-right group called Ottawa Impact pulled together a slate of candidates who ousted 7 incumbents on the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners. Ottawa Impact ran on issues regarding masks, anti-vaccines, and diversity, equality, and inclusion. At their first meeting in January, they fired the county's appointed and professionally certified administrator and replaced him with John Gibbs, who beat out Representative Peter Meyer in the Republican primary, but lost the congressional race to Democrat Hillary Scholten. Gibbs was a former acting assistant secretary somewhere in HUD for Trump's administration, and you know the poor job performance of many acting secretaries in that administration. But that's not all. They fired the Ottawa County Health Officer and replaced her with an anti-vaxxer. The whole Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department was terminated, and the county's motto changed from Where You Belong to Where Freedom Rings. And as a cherry on top, they approved switching from in-house lawyers to the Lansing-based Kalman Legal Group, a firm known for championing anti-maskers and extreme causes. These sweeping changes were added to the meeting's agenda during the meeting, which has prompted Attorney General Dana Nessel to look into violations of Michigan's Open Meetings Act. During the meeting, new board vice chair and Ottawa Impact co-founder Sylvia Rodea said that the Where You Belong motto was, quote, used to establish the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department on the premise that county resident characteristics of being 90% white and largely conservative were problematic for businesses. She followed up by saying, there isn't a racial divide in our county. She said there is an ideological divide in our country. Kate Kilborn, the executive director of Out on the Lakeshore, a Holland-based pride center, said she's afraid of what it might mean for the community's marginalized groups. DEI at any level of government affects our members significantly through access to programming and hiring policies. It also just adds a feeling of inclusion and belonging. And right now, that's the biggest effect that the dissolution of this office is causing, Colburn said. Right now, in the immediate, the response is just a feeling of fear and feeling like there's no longer a place that we LGBTQ plus folks are seen, heard, and valued. Equity and inclusion is a nonpartisan issue. This isn't partisan politics, nor should it be, Colburn said. Belonging should be apolitical and definitely nonpartisan, but we're seeing it politicized in a way that's really uncomfortable and frightening, end quote. These far-right Ottawa Impact extremists also took over a nearby school board, and I'll have a follow-up piece for you and the Kagro in the Morning listeners soon. But as I leave, I want to encourage listeners to support David in any way they can. Thank you, David, for providing such a dedicated service and for helping us weather past defeats and the challenges that are still coming fast and furious at us.
Well, thank you. And thanks very much for the expression of support as well. That part is definitely true. But anyway, yeah, thank you very much for the idea. I have the follow-up piece now. And maybe I don't know. I think maybe should I save it for tomorrow and roll it out then, or I could just follow up with it right now. But I wanted to step in and, one, break up the block a little bit. Two, by the way, how'd you like that fact? That was an interesting pull from the article, by the way, that, no Democrat has won the district since McClellan against Abraham Lincoln. Like, you had a pretty good excuse to be Republican that time and you wouldn't take it. That is kind of an interesting situation. But yeah, I mean, again, nothing outrageous about the fact that they've organized their own slate of candidates and ousted incumbents. That's the way things are kind of supposed to work. But an interesting hint of things to come that she actually, I think, gets at in this follow-up piece, which is why maybe we will just flip over to that one. But like right away, they're adding items to the agenda on the spot, which is, of course, a big violation of the open meetings and transparency laws. You're supposed to, publish your agenda ahead of time so that people who are interested in attending your meetings, which are open, in order to see how you handle certain issues, will now have no notice that those issues are being considered, and it's a violation of open records and open meetings laws. And so, yeah, they're going to end up finding themselves investigated and, of course, saying, this bureaucracy, we just want to talk about what the people's business is and da-da-da. But, again, why don't you just-ism sort of working as governance for people who have no experience in these things. This second piece that she's got gets more into specifics of some of the more local and I guess localized groups and municipal takeover of municipal government and school board stuff as well. That too is just a couple of minutes, and maybe why don't I roll, and then I'll be up to date, but you'll get the full picture of what's going on in this corner of the country. And then in case there's any more updates, then we don't have to wait. We can just roll those out. Let's do it. Let's get to Rosalind's second entry here.
Good morning, David and fellow Kagro in the Morning listeners. Today I have an article from the Holland Sentinel that I thought would be of interest to you. It's about a far-right group called Ottawa Impact and their takeover of the Allendale public school system. As journalist Sarah Leach explains, text messages recently provided to the Holland Sentinel show newly elected Ottawa Impact officials on the Allendale Public School Board methodically arranged for a Lansing-based law firm to take over legal services for the district long before they took office. The first meeting of the year saw a heated debate over which law firm would represent the board on legal matters, in addition to potentially severing its long-standing relationship with the Michigan Association of School Boards. Members of the board sought a change from the Thrun law firm, which represents numerous local districts, to the Kalman Legal Group, with little notice provided to other board members. In text messages spanning from November 21st to January 8th, now Board President Corey Mango, now Vice President Anna Hendricks, and board member Liz Ramey appear to discuss Ramey's intention to solicit Kalman Legal Group services for the school board. The communications were obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request filed by an Ottawa County resident who shared it with the Sentinel. On November 21st, Ramey sent a text saying, I have calls for legal counsel out to Great Lakes Justice Center and David Coleman. I'll let you guys know if I find anything. Thanks. Jumping ahead in the article a little, the author explains, the Great Schools Initiative, among other things, provides parents with forms to opt their children out of sex education in schools. Some of its blog posts include accusations that the Michigan Department of Education is colluding with local teachers, counselors, and administrators to actively deceive parents to cover up involvement in rogue sex ed, specifically implementing GSAs, gay-straight alliances, which the group claims are actively promoted to children of all ages. On December 8th, Ramey said, Friends, Kalman is in. We have a lawyer. Praise Jesus. The text messages also involve newly elected Ottawa County Board Vice President Sylvia Rodia. These texts were sent before she'd been sworn into her new county seat. She assured Ramey that Kalman Legal Group planned to start representing districts with school activist leaders. Rodia mentioned the Great Schools Initiative and how it would support local school boards as well as the Thomas More Law Center. For those who don't know, the Thomas More Law Center is a Christian conservative law firm based in Ann Arbor that aims to defend the religious freedom of Christians, restore time-honored moral and family values, etc., etc. Rodia also told Ramey she talked with Ottawa County Board Chair Joe Moss about the Kalman firm. Both Rodia and Moss were at the Allendale School Board meeting when the vote on Kalman took place. Moss and Rodia co-founded the far-right political group Ottawa Impact in 2021 after they clashed with the county's mask mandate for elementary kids, including the private Christian school Libertas. Moss and several other parents sued, but the suit was ultimately dismissed. The provided text messages also include a discussion over concerns their intention to hire the Kalman firm would draw ire because Moss attended high school with Joe Kalman. Moss and Joe Kalman both graduated from the now-defunct Freedom Christian Schools in 2004 and went on to create several businesses together, 3 of which they still own. Joe Kalman created the company For Liberty LLC, which provided thousands of dollars in graphics, web hosting, and signage services through the businesses that he shares with Moss to the Ottawa Impact candidates during the 2022 campaign cycle. This just proves the old adage, all politics is local. This is Rosalind McGregor, your Michigan correspondent, signing off. Back to you, David.
All right, that's true. Well, of course, all politics is local, but thank you for giving us the update in that corner of Michigan. And, Yeah, what was the other thing that you just mentioned? Another one of those things. Sometimes I think I should keep the microphone open during these things in order to laugh out loud when you deliver a good line. Oh, yes, that's right. I like when you were reading the description of the Thomas More Law Center's mission, and it lapsed into Republican crap, and you're like, yeah, et cetera, traditional values, whatever. The routine, the garbage that they back. All right. Well, let's see. I got one more story maybe that I can cram in, selected more for whether or not I can get the meat of it in before the break than for the appropriateness of the follow-up. But, just wanted to enter onto the record yet another weirdo anti-government neo-Nazi group of wackos who belong in prison targeting power substations. Apparently this time, this according to the Washington Post, a duo accused of neo-Nazi plot to target Maryland power stations. And this is that particularly weird and worrisome group, Atomwaffen again. The Atomwaffen founder, Brandon Russell, and Sarah, what's her last name, Clendaniel, allegedly sought to attack substations around Baltimore. This is written up by Rachel Weiner and Jasmine Hilton and Dan Morse at the Washington Post. But the basics of it is these two, who were already in jail, met while they were in prison somehow. I don't know exactly how, and plotted once they were out to attack more power substations, the idea being they thought that they had a whole plot that would take down Baltimore in its entirety somehow. By the way, for all the people who still think that entire towns, entire cities were burnt to the ground by Antifa, it turns out that once again, all the Republican accusations are confessions, and the people with actual plans to destroy entire cities are the other folks involved in all of this. But apparently, Brandon Russell, 27, and Sarah Clendaniel, 34, have somehow met while they were imprisoned and hatched this crazy plot. They didn't get anywhere with it, which I guess is sort of also indicative of the way these things run. But they're dangerous people. The Atomwaffen folks, despite the fact that they can't seem to pull off plots like this, are no joke. There's a litany of offenses, that is cited in the article that make it pretty clear that they are fairly dangerous. Russell was previously in federal custody, as it says, for possessing bomb-making materials, and Clendaniel in a Maryland facility for robbing convenience stores with a machete, because, of course, they're out to rid the world of the minorities who are creating a rampant crime problem in the United States. Never mind the white crime that they're committing. At any rate, they are only two of the various people whose crimes are, one, connected to Atomwaffen, and two, detailed in the article. It's a string of murders. There's several murders. These people very consistently killing the people around them in their lives. They really are dangerous. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I guess I'll fill you in before jumping topics once again, just exactly how dangerous. When I say they're dangerous, this is what I mean. I'll jump down a little bit in the article from the Post, but talking about the Atomwaffen terrorists. Russell, apparently the founder of the group at just 27 years of age, no less, a former Florida National Guard member, in case you were wondering whether there's anything wrong with the National Guard down there, is the founder of this neo-Nazi group Atomwaffen Division, which attempted to use violent attacks to spark a race war in the United States. Experts say the group, while small, is dangerous because of its influence on the broader far-right movement to eschew politics and spill blood. An Atomwaffen member killed a gay Jewish college student in 2019. Another adherent is accused of killing his girlfriend's parents for opposing his neo-Nazi views. I think I'm familiar with that one. We may even have read the story on the air. And as I recall, he had done something, particularly weird and stupid. Wasn't he the kid who, used a lawnmower to, carve a giant swastika in somebody's lawn? But, of course, worse by far was the fact that I remember this story, killing his girlfriend's parents. I'm sure that endeared him to her. Adam Waffen followers also have threatened and harassed journalists, African-American churches, and Jewish organizations. A former Adam Waffen member named Devin Arthurs, who lived with Russell in Tampa, killed two of their roommates in 2017 and subsequently told authorities that they had been planning attacks on U.S. nuclear plants and power lines. When it comes to planning things, they don't seem particularly good at getting around to the executional stage, which is terrific. But when it comes to spontaneously murdering people around them, they're pretty effective at that and therefore very dangerous. Police discovered bomb-making materials and explosives inside the shared apartment where the murders occurred. Russell subsequently pleaded guilty to possession of an unregistered destructive device and improper storage of explosive materials. I guess that's all they could get away with on him for some reason. I guess he wasn't involved in the murder, but my goodness. Anyway, his replacement as leader of Adam Waffen was subsequently imprisoned for swatting. You know all about that. That's creating fake crises in order to try and provoke lethal law enforcement raids. Russell began talking to an informant while still in prison, according to the court records. He was released in August of 2021. The discussions of infrastructure attacks allegedly began last summer. So they have all sorts of plots and plans to join in, and I don't know whether they're piggybacking on the infamy of the attacks that have already happened or whether this is a generalized thing. Now, you may recall that when we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, I also threw in the story of the right-wing Russian circles that were perpetrating attacks in Spain and began wondering, how much of this might be driven by contact with Russian sources or might be paid for through Russian sources or just provoked by Russian provocateurs. I'm not really sure. And I don't think we're likely to find out until we do it piecemeal by arresting actors in the United States who either carry out or planned such attacks, and then individually, as they drill down, prosecutors might find that there are Russian connections, and then it'll take some time to connect the stories one to the other as well. But I bring that up because that would serve as transition to two other stories that actually make similar allegations. And by the way, at this point, I'll bring up a comment that I got in email from Gil Aquino, who has supported us for many years, listened for many years in the past. And you may remember he, for a while, permitted us to run one of the promos that we run during the breaks, in which he was promoting the idea of making your own submissions and submitting your stories. I believe that was the subject of his promo, wasn't it? But at any rate, he too has been a supporter in the past, and he made a comment that was interesting. I guess he's been listening on podcast, as many people are, and as a result, sometimes you fall a couple days behind. But that's admirable in a way, right? It's nice. You want to hear every single show. You don't just jump ahead to the live one. That's kind of flattering, really, in a way. And so, at any rate, he was listening to a show from a couple of days ago, and we were talking about Russia in general and the misinformation, disinformation campaigns, and who was falling prey to it, and who wasn't, and whether whether hadn't we all in some way fallen prey to it. And I think my recollection of the discussion was that I was also, I think, accepting that perhaps I had too fallen prey to those sorts of disinformation campaigns, especially. The subject was at hand at the moment was very relevant, and I was saying, there are very definitely times when I do this and others do this, where we refer to the invasion of Ukraine as something that began last year, when we talk about the heavy mechanized, full-bore invasion of Western Ukraine, to include Kyiv and the rest. But I mean, we know full well, of course, that the Russians invaded Ukraine much, much earlier than that. Not only is there the example of the full-on annexation of Crimea, which is from, 2014, but also by 2014, the Donetsk region hadn't been formally annexed, but it was pretty clear that there was a Russian military operation ongoing there, and that it wouldn't have been far-fetched to call that a Russian occupation of eastern Ukraine at that point, though they disputed it. That was part of their disinformation campaign. But I mean, it was occupied enough that one, there was live actual bullet exchanging war going on there. And two, they shot down the airliner over the region in 2014. I mean, a third party aircraft passing over this war zone were endangered by the hot war going on there. And for some reason, a lot of us, just as shorthand, like we let it slip that we discussed the invasion in terms of it being something that happened or began last year. And it's just oversight. And it is just like almost, like I said, it rolls off the tongue. It's almost a figure of speech. But how did it get to be a figure of speech? There's a pretty strong argument that that's due to the Russian disinformation and PR and whitewash campaign that planted that idea in our heads, and we spit it back out and only sometimes catch ourselves. And he had said, I should probably take another glance at the email, but oh yeah, now I remember offhand. He said, I was disappointed that you didn't mention that something I remember from way back in the show, in the earlier days of the show, as he said, yeah, it's like 2017 or so. So well into the Trump administration, where at some point I said, and I have vague memory of doing this. I didn't remember it at the time that I was talking about the fact that we all sometimes are sloppy with the dates on the Ukraine invasion. But it is true. I definitely do remember saying at some point, toward the beginning of the Trump administration, that I was becoming concerned with the way it sounded, that we were constantly saying, well, I think Russia did this or Russia did that, or Russia may have interfered in the election, or Russia might be interfering in this, that, or the other thing. And there was a sudden weird feeling like, am I just turning into a conspiracy theorist myself? Should I be more skeptical of the claims that Russia is behind all of these things? Because it does, and not only does it make you sound weird and conspiracy theory like, but I mean, it makes you feel like, Cold War era, and not just Cold War era, but John Birch bent of Cold War era, that the Russians are secretly behind everything. And it struck me that this was a very weird position to be taking and sounded not necessarily all that plausible, historically speaking. But of course, as time went on and more of this had been established, it became, I think, clearer that, yeah, we really are dealing with a rogue state here, if it is even is a state. I've drawn even wilder conclusions in the interim about Russia and what I think of it than mainstream thought, I guess. But I do caution myself internally every once in a while still that does sound a little odd. But I do remember saying that ought not, maybe we shouldn't go overboard with it. And Gil was saying that he had reminded me, perhaps on Twitter at the time, well, that's not outrageous to continue to think of Russia in Cold War terms. They have invaded Ukraine. Even at that point, you could clearly say, look, they have annexed Crimea. This is serious. They behave like Cold War Russia. Why shouldn't you regard them as Cold War Russia? Very true. So I wanted to bring that point up. And yeah, I mean, I think it's been pretty obvious that I've come back around and said, well, now, as weird as it makes me feel to accuse, to constantly be saying Russia, Russia, Russia. I mean, okay. But it really is part of the genius of the disinformation campaign that they're conducting, is that they know very well that Americans will occasionally pause and say, it does make me sound kind of like a weirdo conspiracy theorist to constantly be accusing Russia of doing all these things. And, I mean, it must be the biggest laugh in the world inside the Russian intelligence agencies when something that they didn't have anything to do with gets blamed on some sort of conspiracy theory about Russian activity. And they must laugh like crazy because, of course, that's, I would imagine, is part of the plan. They know that it makes us uncomfortable to constantly be blaming things on Russia, and that's part of the brilliance of it, is that it will constantly keep us second guessing ourselves, which we always have to do anyway, just as good skeptics. Anyway, all right. Related to that, I have two pieces here. One of which is, we'll begin by the one that's grounded in traditional media publication from the OCCRP, which every time I bring it up, I forget exactly what the acronym stands for, and then I go ahead and remind ourselves, and then we move on from there. All right, what are we talking about here? Let's see if I can open up the About page. The Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. I'll just never remember that. It's too long of an acronym. But they, of course, have, their chief focus is on Russia, which is covered by the topic organized crime, if you ask me. But here, this entry maybe helps us feel less conspiratorial about some of these things. Kremlin-linked group arranged payments to European politicians to support Russia's annexation of Crimea. And I believe this is a current publication. February 3rd, as a matter of fact. Martin Lane and Cecilia Anisi, Lorenzo Bagnoli, depending on how he pronounces it, and Tatiana Takchenko is my best attempt at pronouncing that last name. All have the byline on this piece. It's lengthy. It'll probably carry us all the way to Joan's segment, but I wanted to get it on record because it has a lot to do with exactly the sorts of things that we have been worried about, and occasionally that we worry about sounding too conspiratorial about these things, but apparently there's evidence behind it as well. For years, a secret organization run from inside Russia's parliament successfully interfered with European policies on occupied Ukraine. Leaked emails give a new overview of the operation and show how European Union politicians who helped push Moscow's agenda were offered cash and perks. And maybe the best way to be sure that we have some understanding of all of this is to read the bullet-pointed key findings up front, so that in case we don't make it all the way through, you have the key information. 1, leaked emails show how a Duma insider, that's the Russian parliament, of course, a Duma insider built a network of analysts, journalists, and others who helped him push the Kremlin's interests abroad. Secondly, his group offered cash to European politicians to propose pro-Russian motions in their local legislatures and paid far-right activists to publish pro-Kremlin articles in European media outlets. That sounds familiar. The network arranged trips to occupied Crimea for European politicians and businessmen, with travel and accommodations covered by Russian state-funded organizations and honoraria apparently offered to some individuals. And lastly, it also helped bring European political figures to Russia to act as election observers, supposedly, with a €68,000 budget allocated to the project. Now more of the details. Since Russia launched its brutal invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, and even they say it, right? That's interesting. It's the brutal invasion began in February of 2022. The somewhat less brutal invasion, I guess, began in 2014. But why would anybody refer to the beginning of the invasion being 2022? Part of the answer is in the article. Condemnation of Vladimir Putin's overseas aggression has reached a fever pitch, yet Russia can still rely on an occasional friendly voice in Europe. Last November, for example, far-right Italian local legislator Stefano Valdegamberi penned an op-ed decrying the EU's position to designate Russia a terrorist state as a serious mistake that, quote, foments conflict by denying historical truth. Okay. But what Valdegamberi didn't mention was that he had long been collaborating with a secretive Russian lobbying group with a direct link to the Kremlin. Since at least, surprise, 2014, that group has designed plans to channel cash to European politicians to help it legitimize Russia's occupation of Crimea and promote pro-Moscow policies inside EU countries. Details of the group's activities have come to light via hacked and leaked emails belonging to its coordinator, Russian parliamentary staffer, okay, ready for some names here, Sargis Mirzakhanian, who ran the International Agency for Current Policy. That comes up several times in the years following the annexation of Crimea. The emails suggest his group paid politicians thousands of euros to put forward pro-Russian resolutions in European legislatures. A new investigation by Isti Express in partnership with OCCRP, IRPI Media, iStories, and Profil has found. It also helped arrange for political figures from countries including Germany, Austria, Italy, the Czech Republic, and Poland to be flown on expensive junkets to pro-Russia events in occupied Crimea and paid honoraria for their presence. The lobbying group also flew several European political figures to Russia to act as official election observers, which is a problem if, the government that's holding the election pays for you to observe their election. It's a bit of an ethics problem, as it turns out, for actual election observance. The emails, which were leaked by a group of Ukrainian hacktivists, reveal especially close ties between Mizrakhanian's operation and officials in Italy and Cyprus. You tend to forget about Cyprus. They're out there. These ties paved the way for pro-Russian motions to be passed in both countries, with both the Cypriot parliament and multiple Italian regional councils calling for an end to sanctions against Russia over its invasion of Crimea. That's been their goal for a long time. The previous media reports have shown links between EU politicians and Kremlin propagandists, but this is the first comprehensive insight into how this campaign was run from Russia. The emails show that Mizrakhanian, a well-connected staffer and advisor in Russia's parliament, the Duma, built a network of political analysts, journalists, activists, and academics who helped him push the Kremlin's interests abroad. Anton Shekovtsov, the chair of the pro-democracy nonprofit Center for Democratic Integrity, said the leaked emails represent one of the most important sources of our knowledge of how particular engines of the Russian political war machine works. Most significantly, Shekovtsov said, I should just quit now, said they showed Mizrakhanian's role coordinating protests, interesting, right? Placing media articles and preparing parliamentary resolutions across Europe. He's sort of an ALEC for pro-Russian resolutions to be passed in local legislatures, national legislatures throughout Europe. Well, anyway, all this while organizing fake, as it says here, election observation missions as he and his associates sought to legitimize the annexation of Crimea and advance Russian domestic and foreign policy interests. The emails run from March 2007 until September 2017, and it's unclear whether the International Agency for Current Policy is still at work today, although those linked to the network, like Valdegamberi, continue to make pro-Russian statements. Olga Lautman, a researcher on Kremlin-related disinformation and hybrid threats at the Center for European Policy Analysis, said that groups like Mizrakhanians had helped open the door to Russia's ongoing aggression in the rest of Ukraine. Russia was extremely successful in its efforts to soften the response to its various campaigns by putting former and current politicians on its payroll, she said. Russia's latest full-scale invasion is a direct result of the international community's failure to hold Russia accountable after the 2008 Georgia invasion, the 2014 Ukraine invasion, the atrocities they helped Bashar al-Assad commit in Syria, and the various assassinations or attempts using chemical weapons on foreign soil. Yeah, that's all so. We remember each of these things. Mizrakanyan and other key figures connected to his group did not respond to requests for comment. Next up, a section entitled The Price Tag of the Vote. The International Agency for Current Policy is described in one PowerPoint presentation found within the leaked emails as a closed association of professionals that aimed to cooperate with leading EU parliamentary parties and individual politicians. Other presentations and draft presentations named Austria, Germany, Italy, Bulgaria, Greece, Cyprus, Latvia, Romania, and Turkey as target countries. The organization appeared to have a direct link to the Kremlin. Mizrakanyan exchanged more than 1,000 emails between 2014 and 2017 with Inal Ardzinba, a department head in the Russian presidential administration who worked under Vladislav Surkov, a key advisor to Putin at the time. The activities of the International Agency for Current Policy are made clear in a series of presentations attached to the emails in the leak, as well as details in the emails themselves. They ranged from organizing anti-NATO street protests to peddling influence with European lawmakers. The documents also discuss bringing European delegations to Moscow and Crimea and targeting national parliaments of the EU with pro-Russian resolutions. The latter included resolutions to end anti-Russian sanctions and recognize Russia's claim to Crimea, just outright. The emails show how Mizrakanyan's group arranged to make considerable payments to ensure that EU politicians pushed favorable motions in their home countries. Mizrakanyan bluntly described these payments as the price tag of the vote in an email that contained project outlines for Italy and Austria. The group planned for Italian Senator Paolo Tossato and Austrian Member of Parliament Johannes Hübner, both from far-right parties, notably, that's an important part of this, to put forward resolutions in their respective legislatures to lift sanctions against Russia. The project outlines don't go into detail about how this would happen, but a budget of 20,000 euros was listed for both the Italian and Austrian resolutions, with a further 15,000 euros for each in case of successful voting, like a bonus. It's unclear whether these sums were intended to be paid directly to the two politicians or were budgets for the entire projects. In the end, Hübner and Tossato both presented resolutions against Russian sanctions in their respective parliament floors, but legislators did not adopt them. These project plans were reported in the media last year, but without identifying the role played by Mizrakanyan's organization. Tossato denied receiving payments from Russia for the resolution, as did Hübner's party, the FPO. The documents also detail separate projects for Latvia, Greece, and even the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, or PACE, P-A-C-E. However, there are no indications that these motions were ever proposed. That doesn't mean the International Agency for Current Policy didn't find any success, however. In both regional councils in Italy and the National Parliament of Cyprus, motions drafted with the help of Mizrakanyan's Kremlin-linked apparatus were actually passed. Now the success stories. This section begins, "It's a bomb. From the point of view of the media, this will most likely be our loudest informational operation," wrote Mizrakanyan to a colleague in April of 2016. The International Agency for Current Policy was on the brink of its first significant European success. A local council in Veneto, Italy, was preparing a motion recognizing the results of a rigged Russian referendum in Crimea, calling for the end of EU sanctions against Russia. The motion had been drafted with the help of Mizarkanyan's group, and their inside man was local councillor Valdegamberi, at that time associated with the far-right Lega Nord party. On May 18th, 2016, the resolution was adopted by the council by a majority vote. Although a regional legislature has no meaningful power over state policy, numerous Russian propaganda media outlets gleefully reported on the first region in the EU to give legitimacy to Crimea's annexation. In the following months, led by Lega Nord, Italian local councils in Liguria and Lombardy followed Veneto's example and passed their own resolutions, quote, recognizing Crimea as part of Russia. It is extremely important for Russia to infiltrate countries on every level, including local municipalities, said Kremlin expert Lautman. Russia would use these resolutions for domestic propaganda purposes and to infiltrate local municipalities to influence local opinion and capture local politicians. And I'm a little bit behind on the break music, so we'll cut out a little earlier than usual. But I was intent on getting that paragraph out. Even down at the local level, Russians are apparently, in fact, interested in this, if this is legit and this is not itself disinformation. So I suppose even when you feel uncomfortable thinking about the possibility, is it really true that the Russians would be interested in my local town council? Maybe, if they give them propaganda. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter is with us. We're both oxygenating as best we can. I need like a canister of oxygen. We both have colds and sinus infections going on, which will become obvious very shortly. But therein lies the advantage of being a written medium at Daily Kos as she covers the State of the Union tonight. But you'll get a behind-the-scenes peek at what it sounds like as we're typing. We're both a little stuffy, so I guess there's just things going around. But thanks for toughing it out. How are you doing otherwise?
Otherwise, I'm doing okay.
Okay.
Really. Not looking forward to a State of the Union address, but these things must be done.
Yes, right. Well, they're big, supposedly historical events. But the good news is they'll tell you what they're going to say ahead of time.
Yeah, yeah. We do know all of that. We'll get the speech ahead of time, probably. Hopefully, with time to go through it and pick out the snippets we like, so that I don't have to be typing madly trying to catch up with the transcript.
Yeah, that would be
just plug
helpful.
stuff in.
Yeah,
it's a silly thing to do the State of the Union. In fact, NBC News has kind of an interesting story up.
Yeah.
How White House speechwriters keep trying to kill the thing and it keeps not working.
Oh, you mean to stop giving it as a major address? Wow. Yeah. Well, there really is no reason to do it, and historically, I guess for a lot of we're reminded of this every year that historically it wasn't always given as a live speech. I was hoping maybe COVID would kill it entirely at some point,
just send the letter.
Right. And I also thought I thought maybe George W. Bush was going to end it just in terms of it was just going to become such a dumb spectacle that no one would want to give these speeches anymore. It sticks with me that one of his early, I think he did it throughout his presidency too, was he would come out and like literally the first line of the speech was, "My fellow Americans, the State of the Union is strong."
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we're done. Thanks for giving us the State of the Union. But I've never heard anybody just sort of literally say, "Let me just tell you what I think the state of the actual union is. It's pretty strong. It's very resolute." And I was like, I don't know, somehow that stuck with me. That and the beginning of the trend of calling attorneys general something, General Gonzalez. I'm like, this is crazy. We really have lost the point of all of this stuff.
It's really a silly thing.
But okay,
I remember,
it's a ritual.
Was it Bush or Clinton? Bush won. When I was in D.C. working for Wyden, they would also release the budget, their proposed budget with the State of the Union.
Yeah, certainly around the same time. Yeah, right. That's true.
And as staffers for Wyden, our job was to, as soon as we got that budget in hand, usually it was while the speech was going on, pour through it and find everything that could possibly be related to Oregon.
Yeah.
And have the talking points ready by the time the State of the Union ended, because people were going to be calling, reporters were going to be calling for feedback, for their response.
Yeah, right. Tall order.
I sort of have PTSD surrounding
I can imagine.
Because that was a lot. That was a lot.
Yeah, and very rarely they would rarely break things out by state. You'd say, well, all right, this is a national program, and we can expect to have some certain percentage, and you get some feel over the years for what that percentage might be. But they don't make it easy. They don't tell you in many cases off the bat what Oregon will get and everything. But
that all comes later. They do figure all of that out, and really, at least they do now. Not so much then.
Yeah. So I mean, here. Read this budget. Follow the speech so that you know what's relevant and what the president mentions. But read the entire budget and figure out Oregon's allocation for it.
There were 3 or 4 of us doing it, but still.
Yeah. Oh, well, if you've ever had the budget dropped on your desk, I mean, you could have 300 people. You're not going to finish by the time. No. Although it was sometimes, if it happened during Clinton, you might have had the time.
He had the longest? 90 minutes? Was that what it was?
I think, yeah. Although did Trump try to break that record at some point of thinking it was a good record to have? I can't recall. He probably thought that was a wise idea. But yeah, I'm wondering, maybe their Wyden staffers were on the floor telling Clinton, stretch it out. We're not done. But, wow. Yeah,
I don't think we were the only office doing that, but man, I didn't like that. Yeah. I just dreaded that.
It sounds extraordinarily stressful to have to deal with. Let's see. I was just also telling people, just getting everybody up to date. Ilhan Omar got her, they had their vote. They threw her out of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Just wanted to update everybody that actually happened.
I still think that the Santos stepping down from his committee's assignment was part of that quid pro quo to get the people who didn't want to kick Omar off. I think that was part of the deal.
That really does seem to be the case, and even some of the newspaper reports that we read on it seemed to hint that was the case. So I think that's unavoidable as the analysis there. I mean, otherwise there's no explaining the reversals from Nancy Mace and what's the other one I mentioned, who actually went ahead and said, well, all right, I'm a no. And then Santos steps down voluntarily, and then they became yeses.
Yeah.
Though there was at least one Republican voting present there. So it was very brave. To say, but apparently he voted present on Paul Gosar, too. So maybe that is something. It's not bravery. It's just consistency.
Consistency is probably as good a thing as you can hope for from these people.
Yeah, that's a pretty rare attribute all by itself.
Speaking of,
yes,
this morning in conference, McCarthy had to remind everybody to be on their best behavior, that there are going to be TV cameras there, and that mics might pick up their conversations and cameras could pick up what they were looking at on their phones.
Yeah.
It's like he's in charge of a bunch of kindergartners.
Right. Remember, you're representatives of your school.
Uh-huh.
On your field trip.
They're going on a field trip.
Right. So, well, plus, of course, now they have all the other fun angles going on because, everybody became enamored of it during the speaker voting when C-SPAN had freer reign. But as I recall, they do tend to get those sorts of shots during the State of the Union with some regularity, and I'm not certain why.
Yeah, the camera limitation is used to be only for floor sessions, I think, because they did do that during, foreign heads of state visits, stuff like that. They would get the crowd reaction on C-SPAN. So
that tended to be a usual part of the coverage. So, nothing new there, although maybe there'll be some additional cameras. But now everybody's watching and looking out for that. And and
the cameras are going to be on Green and Boebert and Gates and all of the...
When they jump up and try and, come up with some new combination of "you lie" chants.
Yes.
But they love to, and the cameras have captured them before. I wonder whether they'll sit together anymore. Boebert and Green used to sit together for that, and now they're at odds.
Yeah, I don't think they like each other anymore. Which
is fine. That's always good. I encourage a good fight like that. So, everybody, we'll be on the lookout. No magnetometers for today's speech, apparently. Or I wonder if they come back for a presidential appearance. That's a good question.
That is a good question. It would be wise to bring them back for that, I think.
Yeah, then that's the sort of thing that you could many Republicans would be able to say, well, it's a special thing. We don't want to have them daily, but okay, for the presidential address. But then, there will be other Republicans that say, no, never, and it's a Second Amendment violation to do it, but it isn't, but what the hell? Might as well say it is.
The ones who are going around wearing AR-15 pins on their lapels.
Yeah. Right, yes. Yeah. I don't think we mentioned that, but that's a new trend. Somebody has given out little silver AR-15 pins, some of which have replaced the flag lapel pins in some cases, which ordinarily would be a huge outrage and something, and you're canceled. But I guess an AR-15 is as good as a flag to those guys.
Yep, I think it's Andrew Clyde who was handing them out.
Yeah, I think so. I only found that out because I saw somebody circulating that rumor and the picture of him from January 6th.
Yes. Cowering behind Secret Service.
Which, or
Capitol Police, whomever it was.
Yeah, when the windows were being broken and the Capitol Police actually had to draw their weapons, he's rather startled looking, although I am sure I would also have been rather startled looking. Nothing wrong with that at that point, but that's part of the persona. If I had my AR-15, I wouldn't have been so scared looking, and that's why I hand out such pins, I'm sure, is the thinking. But I don't know what they're supposed to get with that, but that's just that's what members of Congress are spending their time on. Coming up with new policy ideas? No. New lapel pins? Yes. That we have.
And fighting Democrats who have asked politely that in committee organization that guns not be allowed in committee meetings. And
actual
I can't
guns?
remember which one it was. I think it might have been Judiciary. That was shot down. Oh, bad. Ooh, bad. That was rejected by Republicans.
But actually carrying actual weapons, not the pins, but
carrying
the guns.
their actually, packing in committee work meetings.
Okay, well, that opens up new possibilities for gun fail, and that's real. Because this is something that they've gone through at state legislatures. I mean, back in the days when I was compiling all those stories pretty regularly, there were a good half dozen situations where in state legislatures, the Republicans insisted on allowing legislators to carry weapons and that they left them behind, dropped them during committee meetings. Nobody accidentally shot anybody else in a committee meeting, but there were definitely legislators who accidentally fired their weapons in their offices and shot holes through their office doors. I think that happened right here in Virginia, as a matter of fact. So they're not immune, And
No.
if you have enough of them and they're dumb enough, and they are plenty dumb enough, well, you might see some mistakes.
These are the people who thought that they could go out and shoot. Well, I don't know that they actually thought they could go out and shoot down this Chinese spy balloon, but they certainly took a lot of pictures of themselves pretending like they were going to try.
I guess so, yeah. They don't have that range. 8 miles up is tough, even for an AR-15. It's not going to work. But those bullets do come back down, so I really hope they didn't fire any. But yeah, this is the nature of who we're dealing with. And by the way, even before these new rules, even at the U.S. Capitol, we've definitely had members either carrying guns and forgetting and boarding flights with guns on them, coming through the metal detectors at the front doors of the Capitol office complex with their guns on them. And, of course, leaving them in the bathrooms, which is the second favorite activity of Republican gun carriers, but besides shooting them themselves or others accidentally, leaving them in the bathrooms. So it has happened at the national Capitol as well, and I guess they're asking for more. Well, I didn't even realize that was so. The Judiciary Committee, in particular,
it may have been oversight. It was one of the two. Yeah.
All right. Well, I was wondering
speaking
about...
of the China balloon, this is sort of interesting.
Yeah.
It may have been sort of the first slapback of McCarthy and the Maniacs. They were going to, over the weekend, they talked about how they were going to have a resolution on the floor today criticizing Biden's handling of the balloon attack, of the balloon, not attack, whatever.
Balloon thing. I mean, what is it even?
McCall, who is chair of foreign relations, said, this would be kind of stupid. And maybe instead we should think about stepping back and changing this into a resolution condemning China for its surveillance practices.
That might be an idea, probably more popular. In terms
and indeed, that is what they are doing. McCarthy backed down, and he even had a line yesterday about how we have to be unified in our approach on China. Yeah,
I'll
it was
take
really
that.
interesting. So expect some maniacs to be pretty unhappy about that today.
Yeah, well, the speeches are already written. It's already criticizing Biden. They won't rule me out of order, so I'll just read that, and then I'll vote for the resolution that doesn't attack Biden, but I'll attack him in my speech.
Yes.
That's how they can handle it. Well, that's interesting. It's what passes for a positive development.
It is, and I think it's probably the first significant or public reversal we've seen from him with what the Maniacs wanted. So it's kind of interesting. We're also saying that he's not on such strong footing when it comes to the debt ceiling as he thought he was going to be. Back before the election, it was all about how we have to cut Social Security, we have to cut Medicare, we have to bring these programs into line, and we're going to do it with the debt ceiling vote. That's completely off the table now, he says.
Oh.
So a reversal there. He still doesn't have any kind of plan. He gave his big rebuttal of the State of the Union last night, which I think 5 people covered. I'm not finding a whole lot of coverage of which he gave absolutely no specifics about what he was going to ask for in these debt ceiling negotiations, because as has been pretty clear for quite a while, there is no plan.
Yeah.
He did, however, say, 1, they won't have a clean debt ceiling vote, and 2, can't raise taxes. No new taxes. So, but
why would you do that when you're dealing with a debt? You're heavily in debt. Don't raise any money.
Yeah.
That can't happen. That's their usual MO for those things. But it's interesting that they're, I guess, backing off of the explicit threats to social safety net programs, which is the usual way of things. But Yeah, there was
But,
some
if you're not doing
danger that they were
that,
going to really
and
do it.
they're off the table. I don't really believe they're off the table. They're going to
Yeah,
try,
that's
but
true. Good point.
taking those off and saying we have to balance the budget in 10 years and we're not going to raise taxes. There is no other government. If you're paying the Pentagon,
Yeah.
if you're paying Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and you're paying veterans benefits,
Yeah, if you're really going to get to balance.
Absolutely everything else.
Yeah. Well,
it's just, yeah.
Once they come to realize that, perhaps they'll. We'll have to see how they decide to wiggle out of that, because of course, they, like every elected member of Congress, they love to bring home the bacon. And I actually had put something aside that I didn't get to today about the renewed or newfound love for earmarks among Republicans. Including those who had run on a platform of eliminating earmarks,
right.
Who now have found out, oh, no, it's actually quite great, and gives me something to talk about.
I remember talking about that with you last time around, at the beginning of the last Congress, when they said, okay, we're doing them again. And it's actually really smart. It's a very smart way of getting big stuff passed. Put in stuff that's good for people's districts.
Yeah.
Duh. And it's kind of what they were elected for.
That's really true. I mean, I've never had a significant problem with earmarks, and it's really just a matter of terminology. They just find a different way of designating money, because everybody likes to be able to bring home money and then have a big announcement. There's $50 million for a big thing in the district, and I got it.
It's one of the things,
even if they didn't,
they're elected to do.
Yeah.
To look out for their districts at the net. I mean, It's just
so much so that my recollection from my days on the Hill was even things that were non-competitive grant type programs that every district got some amount of money, and you weren't allowed as a member of Congress to weigh in on the formula once the agency started its work. They still made a practice at the agencies of notifying congressional offices first before making a public announcement, for the purposes of having each member of Congress release a statement as if they had personally lobbied the government for this money and secured it. It's a long-standing tradition.
That's a nice courtesy, and of course, even with the infrastructure bill, you saw all sorts of Republicans who voted against the thing out there happily using those press releases to say, look what we did. Look what we did for you. Even though they voted against it.
I know, it's true. And some people at the agency spent a lot of time and a lot of hours were put into making sure that it was easy for these Republican hypocritical liars to find the exact number, so that they could immediately go to the press. And you think about, now we think about all the work that you had to do to try to dig out the legitimate numbers from the budget in Oregon. Imagine if they had to actually do their own calculations, although that might have led to them saying $53 billion for my district. Their calculating skills, not always the best. I'm thinking
$1.5 billion for a grade school.
Right. What was it? I think it was something like
teach CRT.
Billions and billions of dollars were being at this one school in in Illinois or something. That Marjorie Taylor Greene was sure that was the case.
Oh my goodness! She was presiding yesterday for a while. Late in the day.
Oh, in the
House chamber.
Well,
it was pretty horrifying, to look up at C-SPAN and see that.
Yeah, I'll bet. They should have given her the QAnon shaman's big water buffalo lodge hat to wear.
So new order, seeing Republicans in the chair in the House chamber, and we haven't had a lot of roll call votes yet that I've had to watch in the Senate, because they finally did just get organized. McConnell did what apparently is his now traditional thing of delaying the organizing resolution as long as he possibly could. Mm-hmm. Just because,
Yeah.
and also because they had the problem of Schmidt in Missouri, who wanted to try to kick either Blackburn or
Oh, yeah.
or Tillis off of the Judiciary Committee so he could have that seat.
Yeah, and I assume they finally got him to take a hike, or did
They got
do
him
it?
to take a hike.
Okay.
I can't remember what he got seated on, but it was not Judiciary.
Yeah.
That was
well,
sort of fun. Anyway, the Republicans finally worked out who's going to be on committees. And one thing that was also very fun was McConnell kicked Rick Scott off of Commerce, which was his most important committee,
Oh.
and didn't assign him to something else.
Oh, interesting.
Just took it away from him. He also took Lee off of that committee. The two that have been raising the most hell and giving him the most headaches.
Oh, well, I guess that's the answer
Yeah.
as to why. But yeah, the Republicans would be, and that's why I guess Schmidt's demand was even more ridiculous. Not only all the things that you told us about it last time, that he'd be, Hawley is already on it, right?
Hawley's already on it,
so
and there's
his
a
state
rule
is
that you
represented.
can't have the same senators representing the same state on, particularly on the big committees, but really
Yeah.
on any committee.
But
All sorts of things, seniority, just courtesy, just he
everything was wrong with that request.
everything
and-
was wrong with that. But of course, he's a Republican.
Yeah, so he made it anyway. But Republicans have that chore now that there is an outright operative Democratic majority. They they can leverage that to where the committees used to be evenly divided. They now have to create a Democratic majority on those committees, and that will often mean that one seat for Republicans has got to go. And that's always a delicate task. But imagine
On
in the
Commerce,
face of,
it was two.
yeah. So
Very happy.
that's good news. And imagine in the face of all this, of veteran Republican senators having to give up seats, is this guy Schmidt saying, "I want an extra one, and it's got to be awesome." And there's 10 reasons why it's against the rules for me to have it, but please, why don't you kick one of these people who have 10 years seniority over me off? How about F right off?
Well, and Blackburn did not have 10 years of seniority, but she's there, we remember, because during the Kavanaugh hearing, it became blatantly apparent that there was no female Republican senator on the Judiciary Committee, and that maybe that was kind of an optics problem for them.
Yeah. Solved by...
So they, picking the
Crazy
dumbest
Marcia.
of the handful that they have to choose from in the Republican conference, they chose her.
Yeah. Well, it's surprising that they did. Well, your job's done. Maybe we should kick you off and put Schmidt on there. But it did. She was able to hang on. So that's, I don't know what.
But
Good news
anyway,
for her.
the whole point was we're going to be getting roll call votes again in the Senate. We're going to be hearing all of these names that are new. It's always sort of jarring
Yeah.
to go through the roll call and you think, who?
Yeah, that's true. There are definitely senators out there. There's definitely some Republicans. I'm like, I had no idea there was a senator named that.
Yes, and I would not be able to pick them out of a lineup.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I guess we'll get somewhat familiar with them, or we'll see them striding onto the floor and giving hand signals of their votes anyway.
Yes.
Okay, so they're back in action.
They're back in action. They're doing Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals judge vote to this week. I think it's going to take probably most of the week because we still have to go through cloture and all of that.
They still do
and
that.
they really don't have anything else up. All we're really going to be seeing from the Senate for most of this session will be nominations because, it's not like the House is going to come up with legislation for them.
That's true.
There will be some legislative votes, but it's not going
have
to
to
be
be
anything
some.
that critical because, well, and it might be important stuff. It might be stuff that's great for messaging and that is important to get done, but knowing that it's not going to go anywhere because of the maniacs in the House.
Yes. It works in both directions, right? There'll be crazy stuff coming from the House that they won't pay any attention to, and then there'll be important stuff that they know they're sending to the House that the House won't be able to handle.
Unless somehow we can get 5 Republicans to start to break. And as of now, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Don Bacon, who is running to reporters regularly to talk about being a moderate, he was the guy who floated working with Democrats to find a compromise speaker candidate at one point. He now says he will not work with Democrats on a discharge petition for the debt ceiling, for a clean debt ceiling hike. So,
all right. Well, no
as of now,
there.
it doesn't look like we can count on the supposed moderate Republicans to do anything to help the country. Surprise!
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're pretty successful at teaching people to stay away from things like the discharge petitions and the motions to recommit, etc. But always some danger in some of those situations, and maybe we should have gone to the State of the Union in person to give as many Republicans sinus infections as possible.
I don't think they're contagious.
All right. Well, at any rate, I'll get something contagious, and it won't be detectable on metal detectors whether they're there or not.
You're close, yeah.
Yeah, I can make it there. I can be there by the afternoon, everybody. So somebody give me a ticket and then wear a mask. Okay. Thanks, Joan, for coming by, braving your own health issues. I appreciate it. We're struggling for you people.
We'll both feel better.
I hope you do. And good luck with it tonight. And I don't know, get some tea boiling and do your best. Thanks for struggling through. We'll see you next week, and hopefully we're both in better shape at that point.
I hope so. Thanks, Kagro.
Okay. Take care. Relax, stop talking, go to the written medium. We'll hand things over. The speaking goes to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. Let's see what I can, if I can press the right buttons fast enough, I can give you a little bit of a preview. Guess what? Going back down to Florida, where a teacher has ripped DeSantis's book banning and criminal charges threats. It'll be good to hear about that. Stay tuned for that news.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
How about this news? 146, that's right, 146 New York City police officers committed misconduct during the 2020 George Floyd protests. So I don't know whether we have a list of those names for you or not, but wow, what a number, yet not much of a surprise if you really think about it. We'll see you tomorrow.